Hey, what is up guys? This is Nishi from MST.TV here, back with another Market Watch episode. So today we're taking a look at a few bigger cards that have been trending on the market over the last week or so, with Justice Hunters being released officially this upcoming weekend. Everyone is obviously super excited to grab all of the necessary cards to put their decks together. That said, we have a lot of other factors that are going on and affecting those card prices. Things like the expectation of an upcoming reprint and different techs that you can play in or against certain strategies. So today we're going to cover a few of the crazier price spikes that we've seen over the course of the last week or so. Let's get started. So kicking things off, let's take a look again at number C104, Umbreal Horror Masquerade. So this is of course something that has been on our radar for the last couple of months or so, because it's being looked at as this crazy tech option for players to use in Vanquish Soul Canine. We've discussed it before, but basically you run a pretty big extra deck package where you can turn 2 level 5 monsters into this card with a regular number 104 attached underneath it, who provides the ability to negate a monster effect, rip a card from your opponent's hand, as well as cut their life points in half. Now, I think that over the last month or so, this card has been really expensive, but at the same time, everyone's been really reluctant to actually spend any sort of money on it. There always was that possibility of the card being reprinted in Justice Hunters itself, even though it wasn't in there, right? That possibility is definitely something that did deter people from wanting to go and pick the card up, and it ends up Konami just trolled us anyways by putting C102 in there instead of C104. But at the same time, I believe that C104 isn't something that you absolutely need to play in Vanquish Soul Canine. I think a lot of builds do play it, and that seems to be what a lot of people are assuming the deck is going to look like. But I think it would also be perfectly reasonable to build the deck without committing so many extra deck spots to bringing this card out and just playing something else instead. Now that said, I think that a lot of the community seems to feel the same way, and as a result, even though we did get confirmation that the card is not going to be reprinted in Justice Hunters, we haven't really seen that crazy of a spike in this card's price. The supers are coming in at around $70, obviously really high for a super rare. The card was already at 60 before, so it's gone up a little bit since the release of Justice Hunters, or since the confirmation that it wasn't in there, but not as much of a spike as we would normally expect to see from confirmation that a card is not going to be reprinted. And then with the ultimate rare, that's obviously the highest rarity version of the card, near mint alties were all the way up at like $115, $120. They've actually come down a little bit, and they're sitting at $100 a piece now. So this is something that a lot of older players did just have lying around, because this card was bulk before. I think Konami never really thought that this is something that anyone would actually be able to go into. I actually had multiple copies myself. What I did was I ended up keeping a super for myself just in case I do decide to play it, but I moved my extra copies at a pretty decent discount just to not be sitting on them in case it does get reprinted, because I was able to find a buyer and they were pretty hard to move at the time. I definitely recommend you guys doing the same thing if you are able to find a buyer or two. Next up, let's take a look at Dark Ruler No More. Specifically, we are going to highlight the quarter century printing here. So Dark Ruler is actually being looked at once again as something that could see a lot of side deck play this upcoming format. It had sort of fallen out of favor over the course of the last year or so, since it wasn't particularly strong against either Malice or Ryziel. However, it seems that a lot of players are jumping back on the card since it's able to shut down the effects of a full Vanquish Soul Canine or Yummy board. Of course, the decks will have ways to still play the game even after getting hit, but Dark Ruler is a way to turn off multiple interactions from your opponent at the start of your turn and not give them a chance to respond to this card, so it's looking like it will be a powerful option, especially since it is searchable with Triple Tactics Thrust. Fortunately, Dark Ruler No More has a ton of accessible printings, as it was in Rarity Collection 1, and it was also in a couple of structure decks as a common. However, there are some price bumps that are worth noting. The quarter century printing is the big one. These were at $20 for the longest time because it wasn't really seen play. They did hit 30, and now we're seeing them up again at the $40 to $45 range on TCG Player. Aside from that, it's also worth noting that some of those luxury rarities, like the Prismatic Ultimate Rare, the Prismatic Collector's Rare, and the Platinum Secret Rare, all from Rarity Collection 1, those are starting to trend upwards and are moving at around $2 per copy now. This is just one to make note of, and it's definitely a card you will want to own a set of if you plan on playing competitive Yu-Gi-Oh! This upcoming format. So find whatever rarity it is that you want to play with that fits into your budget, and definitely keep an eye on this card's price moving forward. I do want to take a second to remind all of you to check out our website, MST.TV. Now, over at MST.TV, we have everything that you will need to optimize your Yu-Gi-Oh! Tournament experience. We have the basics with white, black, pink, and our new purple matted sleeves, which are my personal favorites, as well as smooth and matted sleeves to double sleeve your valuable cards and sleeves with for tournament play. But we also have some other items that you can really use to customize your collection. We have amazing foil sleeves, including some with the MST.TV logo, and dividers and subdividers so that you can keep your collection perfectly organized and easily accessible. Regardless of if you're a competitive or casual player, I'm certain that you'll find something that you will enjoy over at MSTmerch.com. Next up, we're taking a look at a couple of trap cards, starting with Dominus Purge. So Purge was the first of the Dominus cards to come out, and it is pretty solid. I think it's not like Impulse, where if your deck can play it, you kind of have to, but it's a good option for decks to have access to. So this is sort of like a limited Ash Blossom, since it's really only able to stop searching, and it can only be used by decks with light, wind, and earth monsters. So right now this card is seeing a ton of hype because of the Yummy strategy. They're all light monsters, so for the most part, this is a hand trap that you can use without having to worry about limiting your own strategy. Over in the OCG, most Yummy builds actually do run Dominus Purge. Obviously, searching is as important as ever, but we also have to remember that the K9 cards get stronger if your opponent activates a monster effect in the hand or graveyard this turn. So since Dominus Purge is a trap, it's a decent alternative to Ash Blossom that you can use that isn't going to enable your opponent's cards in the K9 matchup, which is important since the Yummy cards also don't activate in the hand or graveyard at all either. So with Purge, this card's price has been on an absolute roller coaster recently, with the upcoming release of the Yummy cards and a lot of players seeming to want to jump onto that strategy. Purge had shot way up in price, reaching a peak of around $70 to $75 per copy. However, that only lasted for a couple days. We always knew that the card should fall into that reprint range of the 20-25 tins, and as if Konami knew that the price of the card was spiking and they just didn't like that, they officially confirmed on the Konami page that both Purge and Impulse are going to be reprinted in the 20-25 tins as secret rares. I know some people were really hoping that they wouldn't be in there, and that was sort of what was keeping the card's value up, but with that confirmation, the card has swiftly fallen back down to $40, and I would expect it to fall even further soon. This card might retain a little bit of value and stay a little bit higher leading up to YCS Vancouver, since people are going to want them for that event, but after that there's no big event between then and when the tins come out. We should expect the price to fall even further right after YCS Vancouver, so definitely move this card ahead of that event if you can. So the next card we're looking at is of course related, and it's Songs of the Dominators. Now this is another hand trap that's similar to Dominus Purge, but it negates the effect of a monster on the field, and instead of locking out certain attributes, if you activate this card from your hand, you can't use the effects of monsters in your hand, graveyard, or banishment until the end of the next turn. So as we mentioned, the drawback doesn't really negatively affect the Yummy strategy at all, so this is something that the deck is aiming to use. The cool thing is that if you have a trap in your graveyard, you can also search for a copy of Dominus Purge, which is really useful as well. Over in the OCG, this is something that a lot of Yummy players were actually side decking 3 copies of. They were main decking the 3 copies of Purge. But here in the TCG, most lists that I've seen have players wanting to main deck both 3 Songs and 3 Purge. Because of the hype for this card, we have seen the card trending upwards over the last little while. This card was actually pretty cheap for a while there, coming in at only $10 per copy. However, with the play that the card is expected to see this upcoming format, as well as the play that it has already seen in the OCG, it has gradually climbed up in price, and we're now seeing the card moving between the $25 and $30 range. Now with this one, I definitely think that we can actually expect it to continue to go even higher in price, especially if Yummy proves to be a very viable deck that is one of the top 2 or 3 decks of the format. Impulse and Purge are going to be much more accessible and affordable after the tins, but Songs of the Dominators definitely will not be reprinted in there. So expect more players to be looking for this card and for its price to increase as a result pretty soon after the tins drop in just over a month. So here's one that I think is really important to make note of. It's Triple Tactics Thrust. So Thrust is actually a pretty crazy card if you really think about it. If your opponent activated a monster effect this turn, you search for any normal spell or trap card. If your opponent doesn't control a monster, it goes to your back row and you can't use it this turn. But if they have a monster, then you just get to add it to your hand. So I think that Thrust is looking like it will actually be an incredibly powerful tech card going into next format that players are going to look to add to the main deck. There's a pretty big emphasis on being able to play on turn 0 when you're going second next format, since you have Holly Sue, Izuna, and Phimeta all being monsters from their respective archetypes that you can summon and do things with on your opponent's turn. Thrust is a card that can punish those plays really heavily, especially since you can search for talents since they have a monster on the board most likely, and then you rip another card from their hand and that can really set your opponent pretty far back. Even if it's not on turn 0, remember that the Vanquished Soul cards, they do have to bounce and summon during the main phase, and Vanquished Soul Canine is looking like arguably the best deck next format, so those are probably going to be really playing hard into Thrust and Talents as well. So the cool thing is that Thrust has had quite a few different reprints since it was in the tins, it was in one of the maze sets, and of course it was in Rarity Collection 3, so you would think that the card was pretty cheap. However, it was never as cheap as most of the other bulk cards that you'll find in Rarity Collections, but it was only like $7 to $8 for a while there for the Super, Ultra, and Secret Rare printings, right? Not the luxury rarities. However, the card has actually really steadily climbed in price over time, and now all of those lower end printings are actually moving at $14 to $15 each, which is insane value. I think that the risk with this one is that it could be thrown into a side set, maybe reprinted as a common whenever we get another structure deck, and those reprints will bring the value down eventually, but it doesn't seem like any of those things will be happening anytime soon. If you did open Rarity Collection 3, make sure that you know where your extra copies of this card are, because I'm thinking that they'll be extremely hot sellers going into this upcoming format. Up next, this is a card that I've had my eye on for a little while. It's Psy-Framegear Delta. So of course, with Gamma being limited, the Psy-Frame cards haven't seen much play recently. Like, you can use the one of Gamma and a driver, but that means that you're drawing the brick about as often as you're drawing the hand trap itself. However, recently we've been seeing Delta a lot more as a side deck option. This card is basically the same thing as Gamma, but it negates spell cards. Of course, you have to control no monsters on your side of the field in order to activate it. This card can be really devastating though. Theoretically, this card can be really strong against Crossout Designator and Called by the Grave, helping to ensure that your own hand trap like Droll and Lockbird or Artifact Lancia is actually able to resolve. However, Crossout Designator and Called by are limited to 1, so maybe that's a little bit more niche. Alternatively, I have heard people talking about siding this card against certain Mitsurugi variants. Maybe not against pure Mitsurugi since they have so many different ritual spells, but against Ryziel Mitsurugi, if you use this and you negate Mitsurugi ritual, that's a really strong engine that you're basically denying your opponent access to. So with Delta, the card has two different printings. It was originally a rare in High Speed Riders, and then it got a super rare upgrade in one of the OTS tournament packs. Now for some reason, we're actually seeing the rares being more expensive than the holo super rares. The rares used to be around $2 to $3 each, as did the supers. We're now seeing the rares coming in at $8 to $9, and then the reprint super rares strangely cheaper than the non-holo printing at $4 to $5 each. Definitely an interesting side deck choice, though I don't know if this is going to see much play going into Justice Hunters format. It's not really a card that I see popping up in very many OCG lists. At the very least, I think you guys should be moving your rare copies while they're oddly high in terms of value. Maybe keep a set of the supers for yourself to use, just in case it does come back into the format. Alright guys, that is all I have for today's Market Watch episode. Definitely super excited to be opening some Justice Hunters. I'm going to be going to my local OTS later today with some friends to crack some boxes. I'm hoping to build all 3 of the decks, so I guess I'll be happy with whatever I pull, but obviously I do want some of those collectors rares and QCRs, or Starlights, I guess, not QCRs anymore. Anyways, guys, if you did enjoy today's Market Watch episode, please make sure you let me know by hitting that thumbs up button. Make sure you leave a comment in the comment section down below. Hit subscribe if you haven't already. And until next time, guys, don't forget to hold on to your MST.TV.